All right, in the interest of time, we're going to get started here. So a few more people joining, but we'll be good to go after the intro here. So thanks for joining us today. Avoiding the pitfalls when using LLMs for BI. Mike Smitherman here with Metric Insights. Also got Marius Moscovici with me today. Hey, Marius.
Hello, Mike. Welcome, everyone.
And today, so the usual sort of housekeeping things. So the Q&A panel should be activated down the bottom. Feel free to type any questions in there as we go through this. We'll certainly leave some time at the end to answer those. There's the chat window as well. If you have any issues, feel free to reach out in there. We are recording this, so you'll get a link to this afterwards to share with others if you want to. And the agenda for today is Marius is going to take us through sort of our perspective, his perspective on the background of what's happened with sort of AI and natural language processing and LLMs in the BI space over recent years, and then talk about sort of what this topical large language model discussion sort of brings to the party, and really how we can start to think about applying that in the BI space. And I'll take over then and show you a specific example of what we're doing with it in Metric Insights and how we're applying it to our platform. And hopefully that will give you some ideas of sort of successful implementations of some of this technology. So with that, Marius, I'll hand it over to you to kick off.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everyone. So to kick things off, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about just the general promise of natural language in BI, because really it's not like LLMs are the beginning of this journey. We've been, probably for at least 10 years, there's been some kind of activity in BI around natural language, and it stemmed from this just general allure, if you like, a promise around doing away with the most arduous part of BI for most users. Like if you think about as proud as we are as practitioners of BI about our dashboards and reports, the beautiful creations we generate, most of our users, if you ask them and you give them a little truth serum and you ask them, they'll tell you they would much rather not use those dashboards and reports at all. Right? All they want, they have a question and they want an answer to that question. And if they could just get that really quickly, then that, without having to sort of try to interpret a complex report and do filters and all that, then that would be huge, right? That's a lot of value to them. So for a long time, there's been an effort to kind of try to go that route and make it possible for people to be able to get their questions answered with language rather than visually, right? And that's taken a few different forms. So there have been solutions in the natural language generation space. So here you can think of Narrative Insights or ARIA and a number of others that take data from dashboards or from data sets and generate narratives from there. Right? Explain to you, what are the key takeaways from the particular dashboard that you're looking at. And these have been, again, very alluring, very attractive, but from an implementation perspective, most companies have found to be very limited, right? And this is for three really key reasons. It's historically very hard to configure and deploy these systems. You've got to come up with all these different rules, what algorithms you're going to use, give it a lot of metadata. There's a general lack of flexibility. If you change the data set, now all of a sudden, maybe your narrative isn't even right. You've got some assumptions that are in the metadata that are not, that you need to re-encode into how the model works. So that's a big problem. And then fundamentally, probably the biggest issue is that while these have a lot of novelty to it, it's kind of cool to look at a dashboard and see a little analysis next to it. It's a lot of reading, right? Like to be able to figure out what's going on, and the narrative largely, from day to day, maybe is not changing that much, right? So you run into this problem where your users, the first time they might read it because they're intrigued and it's a novel thing, but 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months later, they're ignoring it completely because they're not getting, the juice is not worth the squeeze, so to speak, right? It takes a lot of effort to read, and unless that narrative is really pulling out some insight that they would not have, that is a wow kind of insight. If it's just telling them what the data is doing and it's not fundamentally different from what it was doing last week or last month, that's providing almost no value, and therefore they'll stop exerting the effort to read, and it just becomes sort of background noise. It's like ads on Google, right? You just walk right by. So another area historically where people have been working on is a natural language query. So here the idea is, hey, let's make it possible for users to ask and answer their own questions, right? And this has, here you can think of tools like ThoughtSpot or Tellius or Answer Rocket, various technologies where whether you're vocalizing and it's transferring into text or you're typing, you're kind of giving the engine some criteria, and then it is coming back to you with results. So it's generating SQL based on what you're saying behind the scenes, executing it, and returning the results for you, so that you don't need to know SQL to run your queries. And these have, I don't want to downplay the value of these. Lots of organizations are getting lots of value out of tools like ThoughtSpot and Tellius, but there are limited as well. There are limitations that are important to consider, and that's that. First of all, you need to do extensive data prep, right? To bring it into, you can't just take any arbitrary data set, plug it into a natural language query generation system and get good results. Your metadata has got to be well structured. Your data has got to be extremely clean, so that you're not going to get so the system can really understand how to formulate the right queries and get the right solution. It has to be in a very performant environment, a Databricks or a Snowflake or something that performs really well at scale. So that's going to be very expensive. And by definition, you end up with this fragmented solution space. You end up having in a large enterprise maybe a dozen different models for different areas. One looking at sales data, one looking at manufacturing, one looking at financials. And maybe multiples among each of these verticals, and a user has to know which model do they go to answer that question. So you get this fragmented solution space that also acts as a real hindrance to adoption. And then finally, there's generally a limitation of mapping natural language to SQL, right? So you've got it's very easy to ask a question in plain English, but there's some ambiguity oftentimes as to what that question is answering, and mapping that accurately to SQL in a consistent way is actually not a trivial problem, and is not always solved in a 100% accurate way. So that's sort of the history. That's sort of the generation one a natural language and AI application to the general user trying to find their answer. And now we've gotten this renaissance. Everyone's aware of it with large language models, and they bring a lot of capabilities to the party that were not present before. So I want to kind of touch on those, and then really touch on, beyond the hype, what are some of the limitations and what are the things you really need to consider as you're working with these. So first of all, one of the most phenomenal things I think everyone has realized out of these systems is that they're really reasoning engines, right? They're able to understand a lot from language. They're able to kind of bottle up this level of intelligence where you can explain something to them and they can do inferences and they do things that were just not possible at all from the generation one systems. And so therefore they're really much more robust in terms of being able to handle everything from typos to questions being asked in many different ways, and then deriving the meaning and a complete understanding of what is being asked. And so that's very, very important. They also provide conversational interactions, right? So I am able to ask a question, get a response, ask another question, have a chat, which is much more natural in the way that I interact with, much more akin to how I would be interacting, say, with an analyst if I'm asking a question, right? If you think about how you talk to your analyst, you might ask them a question, they give you an answer, you ask a follow-up, they give you a follow-up answer, and so on and so forth. And so in that respect, it's much better aligned with how we as users would want to deal with an agent that's helping us, right? And then they have the ability to understand context. So they have the contextual understanding of all the conversation thread that's taken place before, and you can also set in all these LLMs to the system message typically a context to say, here's the boundaries of what you're supposed to be doing, here's the areas and here's how you want to respond to the user. And that's also very powerful as far as you really tuning and providing a much more intelligent and helpful experience to users. And then probably, maybe most importantly, you can connect these LLMs to tools and extensions. So you can connect it to resources that you have set up within your environment. You can connect it to, if you've taken all of your maybe help articles and knowledge base information, and you create, vectorize that into a storage engine. You can collect that into that environment and get that information back and have access to it. You can connect to tools that will do things. It'll open up a support ticket when you need something to be done, or send an email to someone. And so from that perspective, as bots create a much more powerful experience than simply just translating information into a natural language, a narrative, or answering a single one-shot question, right? So with all of these benefits, there also comes some significant limitations, because this technology today is still really in its infancy, right? And it's very important as you think about applying this technology into your solution space, because there are so many different ways you can apply it. You really want to understand these limitations and have them in mind, because it's very easy to go wrong. Very easy to create a solution where you're actually solving a problem that's not really suitable for a large language model type solution. So what are some of these key limitations? Well, high data volume is a big constraint, right? So many of us, if you're in a large enterprise, you've got terabytes of data, maybe many terabytes of data usually, right? That you're dealing with, maybe petabytes of data. And these systems, by large language model, the whole idea is that it exercises attention over a particular small context of data. 8,000 tokens, 32,000 tokens of data. Something that is not that's in the realm of the actual data volumes are minuscule data sets, what we'd be dealing with, right? So it is not a solution where you can say, here's all my transactional data, and I'll only ingest that all into a language model, and then ask a question about it, right? That just doesn't work, so you can't do that solution. I think those are, you have to distill the information first into a much smaller subset that you can bring into the model, and then have it operate against that as a reasoning engine, right? So even if you look at things, the companies like ThoughtSpot and Tellius that have leveraged large language models into their solutions, they do it more on the SQL generation aspect than on the actual processing of the data itself. Now you'll see, if you go, there's demos of this with ChatGPT and so forth, analyzing data, but they're always on very small data sets, so they're not real solutions. Data security is a really big deal, right? So by definition, these systems do not have security built in, from the perspective of making sure that you don't ask a question and get answers on privileged information or things that don't apply to you. So you've got to consider that and build that into the architecture of anything that uses the LLM solution. Accuracy and consistency. Obviously, anyone that's used ChatGPT or GPT-4 for any prolonged period of time has seen it hallucinate, has seen it make up information, or has simply seen the fact that you ask the same question 2 or 3 times, you get 2 or 3 different answers, and they might all be credible, but they're not the same answer, right? In business intelligence, you usually want the same answer to the same question. You want to have a high level of certainty. So that's a real challenge. But then even beyond that, there are some other sort of more fundamental issues that you want to consider. Think about for a moment about how you interact with an analyst, or if you're an analyst yourself, what you bring to the party when a business user asks you a difficult question. I would maintain that there's a lot of intuition and judgment that you bring that's required to answer more complex business questions. In other words, it's seldom really just about take the question, apply a SQL statement, create a SQL statement from it, and get the answer. You need to really think about, what is the user really trying to get to? Based on the data quality issues that we have, is this something that's answerable? And how do I go about, and what's the best way to answer it? Which is the best data set I should use? What caveats do I need to place on the response that I come up with? All those things are just nuanced, and they're things that are not going to be present in a large language model that has just been trained on the corpus of the internet and really doesn't know or understand your data, right? It hasn't been in the organization, it hasn't worked with the data for a long time and developed sort of those intuitions that you have as a human analyst. for this reason, it's really using these systems to try to answer business questions directly is fraught with peril, right? Because it's very easy to just create a SQL statement, generate a response, and then that response being wrong, right? And then another sort of piece that kind of is tangential to this, but is also something that as an analyst you really bring to the table that's very important, is you have a knowledge of externalities that maybe are not in your data at all. So what I mean by that, if somebody asks me to look at why our your usage dropped to the site yesterday, and I know that we had an outage right last night, I heard about it, or somebody, as an analyst, there was some email that went around that described the fact that there was some kind of a system issue related to the site. Then, with the knowledge of that externality, I know kind of where to go looking. I would say, oh, well, how much of this was affected during the time when this occurred. That's a very difficult thing for a language model to do. You're not going to be able, it's not going to be able to go through all of your email, all of your Slack conversations, figure out what's relevant, what's not to a particular question, and apply that to it. Not at the stage that the models are at today, right? So, state-of-the-art technology, while it's fantastic and incredible, it's not going to be able to solve for those kinds of problems. So then, given that, right, given the fact that there's still a fairly limited number of things you can do with data alone at scale with these models, that doesn't mean that you can't do useful things and you can't generate value, because really an analyst's job is much more than just about the data, right? And so a way to think about how to get value out of these technologies today, not what's going to be there in 5 years from now, but what's today, is to think beyond the data. So you want to think about, what are the ways in which analysts are spending time today that are not high value analysis? Where are they not, deep in there looking to figure out some pivotal business question, but what are they doing that are addressing common inquiries? Places where people are looking for a metric that's already been defined, or report which maybe it's a new person who's just joined the marketing team and needs to know which report they should use for something, or resources. I need to be able to add I need additional licenses for my team, or how do I get training on Tableau? Or there's 1,000 different things that analysts do on a day-to-day basis where they're connecting users to the right information rather than just doing data analysis. And if you look at those set of universal questions, you usually will discover that many of them could be addressed by self-service with a bot that has access to all of the resources and the metadata and the key information that's required to answer the user's question and point them in the right direction. And this is a much more fruitful avenue to pursue in the near term, because it isn't limited by those limitations that we talked about before: large data volumes, security considerations, things of that nature. And so it's all about, the big value proposition from as we see it initially is really helping users connect to the right resource, and doing so in a way that really frees up the analyst then to spend more time working on analysis, and makes it possible for users to self-service, to find this information on their own at any time, at any point, even when they don't have access to these very scarce analysts that cost a lot of money and are not necessarily available because they're working on high value problems for the organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike so that you can kind of bring this down to a concrete level and show you how we are doing a solution of this vein with Metric Insights.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So yeah, let me take you through sort of a tangible example of, as Marius said, what we're doing here with this concept of what we're going to talk about, the BI Concierge. And just before we jump into that, I just want to give some sort of basis for what we're up to here at Metric Insights, because it sort of sets the groundwork for that discussion. So yeah, what the Metric Insights platform is all about, as some of you probably know, is this ability to provide sort of a centralized portal for the BI teams and for end users to organize, control, curate, and access content within the organization, wherever that might exist. So large organizations, multiple BI tools, reporting in every application out there, documents, spreadsheets, all of the above. We provide this sort of centralized place to manage and access that content. And a central piece of that is the idea of the catalog, the library, if you like, where that content can get published and organized in one place. And it's what you're seeing here with each of these sort of tiles being a particular report or asset or spreadsheet that's been published into the catalog. Now, when we make the connections to those different sources of BI, whatever they might be, a big part of what we pull in is metadata associated with those assets. So the example here is a Power BI dashboard, I think here, where when we connect to Power BI and someone publishes a particular dashboard, we pull in things like obviously what it's called, any descriptions, maybe some tags from Power BI itself, but we allow you to layer on additional metadata and context around that asset. So things like what I have here, maybe there's definitions and glossary terms that we want to make users aware of that are used within the dashboard. Maybe it's how metrics are calculated within the dashboard. Maybe it's ownership of the content, who's responsible for it, categorization of it, is it for internal use, externally facing data, does it contain PII data, all those things that give the user the context around what it is and how it can be used. And that metadata, again, typically comes from a combination of the underlying source. It may be coming from a connection to, say, a data catalog like Elation or Calibra, and oftentimes it's metadata that gets added as part of the publishing process when the dashboard gets put into the catalog. As well as giving the context behind the content, it's also what we use today within the platform for this idea of BI search. So within Metric Insights today, you can come in and in a sort of Google style experience, search for content. You can enter sort of natural language search terms. We do some natural language processing against the search terms to recognize key keywords in there. And we go and look through the metadata that we were just talking about to bring back a ranked set of results, hopefully bubbling up to the top what users are interested in. And that search today is available obviously through the portal itself and the browser. We make it available within the mobile app and also through integrations with things like Slack and Microsoft Teams, where I can run those searches and get the results directly within those products. And it's this component of the platform that we kind of are looking at as it relates to integrating with LLMs and achieving some of the things that Marius was just talking about in his slides. So if you think about that search experience today, and again, think of sort of Google and what happens when you run a search there. When I go and search for something in our search today, typically I'll end up getting quite a large volume of results back. And what we're hoping is that through the ranking algorithm that we use and through looking through the metadata and ranking things appropriately around those search terms, that will bubble up to the top of the list the most relevant assets within the catalog and hopefully deliver to the user what they were looking for. And reality is that sort of search paradigm is kind of really good if I'm just looking for something that I kind of know is already out there, or I suspect it's already out there. I just don't necessarily know which tool it's in or where to find it. I can enter what I suspect is close to the name of the report or the keywords that the report contains, and the chances are I'll probably within the first few results see what I'm looking for. What it is less optimized around is more of a sort of discovery type process where if you think about the conversation that you might have with an analyst today, yeah, if I am trying to answer a particular business question, I might pick up the phone to Marius as an analyst and say, okay, here's what I'm trying to figure out. Do we have any content? Are there any reports or dashboards out there that might help me with this? And Marius, is going to try and come up with understanding what's out there in his world and hopefully make some recommendations around it. And it's that sort of discussion that we want to try and achieve with something like an integration with LLM, and it's where this BI concierge concept comes into play. And it's analogous, as you probably guessed, to sort of the hotel concierge. If I go and visit a new city or a country, I've got two options. I can get online or be old school and go and buy the guidebooks. And, with that scope of knowledge that I've been able to uncover, make some decisions about, where I'm going to eat, what I'm going to visit, and sort of put together my itinerary. Or I can, when I get to the hotel, reach out to the concierge, who probably has a better, more up-to-date knowledge of what's going on in the area. And through more of a conversation, a back and forth, where we clarify and ask questions about what it is I'm interested in and what I'm hoping to get out of the trip, can probably make some more targeted and better recommendations to me. And we want to bring that sort of conversational concierge-like experience to discovery of BI in the organization. So what does that mean? Well, it means sort of providing this conversational functionality to obviously the business user, who we want to be able to answer those questions that they might have with the analyst today. And it could be things like recommendations for content in a certain area. So can you recommend reports that show me sales performance by geography? Maybe that I'm new to the organization in the marketing department, responsible for marketing analytics, and want to understand what some of the existing sort of popular reports are in the area that I'm responsible for. Or it may be that sort of example I just said, where I've spotted something within the business, and I want to try and find some data to help me explain why, say, gross margin dropped in the region that I'm responsible for last month. And so we want to be able to answer those sort of more business type questions that the analyst is probably spending time on answering today. But because we collect this sort of level of metadata around all the different assets that we're pulling in, we can also start to serve some of the business analyst questions today as well, that typically they'd spend time themselves trying to answer. So things like, I've had a request to create a report around a particular area of sales data. Well, I know those metrics and that data is in a particular table in the data warehouse. Well, what other reports have been created on that table so that I don't potentially duplicate effort that's already happened there? Or again, I'm new to the organization in the sales team and responsible for sales ops and reporting. Well, what are some of the common tables that other analysts are using within the data warehouse for creating sales reporting? Are there any potential duplicate reports, or are there any tables out there that aren't necessarily really being used when we look at the report usage, and we can reduce our maintenance in some of those areas? So we want this concierge to really, this concierge is fulfilling questions from both the business user and the analyst. Now, as Marius said, so the key concept in all of this is, if you think of those conversations with analysts today, it's never sort of a one question, one answer, done sort of conversation. It's always sort of drilling to that next level of detail until you get to the answers you need. And so it needs to be a concierge-like experience. It needs to be a conversational experience where if I ask a particular question and the concierge comes back with an answer, either it asking me clarifying questions or me refining what it is I'm actually looking for can happen in sort of this back and forth way until we get to a recommended report that is going to work, or a a set of reports that are going to help me answer the question. And so the conversational aspect and the power of some of the things that Marius was touching on in his slides is critical to this concierge experience. So let's look at how this sort of manifests itself within the platform itself. We've got about sort of 10-15 minutes of some demo here, and then we'll open it up to questions. So as we go through this, again, encourage you to pop any questions you have in the Q&A window. But as I mentioned today, we're integrating this into the Metric Insights portal itself. We're also going to be putting it into the mobile app and the Slack and Teams integrations that we have. But it all starts with being able to empower users to ask a question of the concierge. And so a simple business user example, as we saw before, might be, can you recommend a report that I can use to figure out why gross sales dropped last month in the region that I'm responsible for? And the first thing that the concierge is really doing is figuring out the intent behind this question and checking that what it is that I'm looking for is actually a recommendation around BI assets within the organization that we might have. When I ask that question, essentially what's happening is the concierge is taking that question. Today we're integrating with GPT to understand what the question intent is, and GPT is working. We'll look at sort of a logical architecture in a minute. Is working with all the metadata that we've collected, our search engine API that we have today, security, permissions, to ultimately come back with a recommended set of reports to help me answer that question. So it's come back here on the left-hand side in the discussion panel with 3 recommended reports, their descriptions, so I've got some context around them. And on the right-hand side, it's building up this sort of carousel of recommendations as it goes. And as a user, I can start drilling into those recommendations. So when I click on a particular tile on the right-hand side there, I can see all that metadata and context around that particular report. So in this case, a Power BI report showing regional sales. I get an image of what the dashboard looks like right now, and any metadata that we've collected about it. So what metrics does it contain? Who's responsible for this report? How's the data classified and categorized? All the stuff we spoke about before. But as we've been saying all along, if this was my initial question, I probably then have follow-ups that I want to make some clarifications on. So I can see this particular report probably answers, sales in Canada. But I can go and continue the conversation on the left-hand side here. I see this is sort of focused around product sales. Well, I'm also interested in understanding how our sales within the region break down by different channels. We have an online business and store sales. And so, that's actually the breakdown I want. So I can continue the conversation with the concierge, and it's going to go back out and either clarify suggestions it's made already or make additional suggestions and add them into the carousel on the right. And it's actually found a report now where it's got regional sales broken down by channel as well. So a very simple example, but the key things going on here is that inference around what the intent of the question is, being able to look through the metadata and the catalog of content and be able to come back not with hundreds of results and rank them, but some very targeted suggestions about what it is that I'm looking for. The other thing that an integration with an LLM like GPT allows us to do is continue the conversation in a way that helps us also carry out actions within the product. So within the Metric Insights platform today, there's a number of sort of functional areas that that users can do with the content that they find within the catalog or within search. And it's things like being able to subscribe to content, share it with other users, more complex things like setting up alerts to be notified if certain metrics change significantly within dashboards and reports that I have access to. And reality is that these areas of functionality, whilst they exist today within the platform, require some level of product knowledge to be able to carry out these actions. And it's not necessarily particularly complex, but if I want to set up an alert, there's a 4 or 5 step alert wizard that requires me to go through and define the rules and define how I want to receive the alerts and how often. There's a number of steps and a number of knowledge that's required to do that. If I want to subscribe to a piece of content, what's the schedule? Set up the schedule. How do I want to receive it? Do I want to include any other people in that distribution? All things that require a number of steps to carry out. And so within the context of this conversation, we can use the LLM and an interaction with the concierge to help with those things and use a sort of guided conversation here. So it might be something simple like, okay, I've found this particular report. I want to subscribe to that and start receiving it on a regular basis. It's something useful to me. And because the concierge has the knowledge of sort of the metadata within our application, it already knows that I'm receiving another distribution on a weekly basis in my email at 8 a.m. every Friday morning on the left-hand side there, and therefore can make a recommendation that maybe, let's include this one in that weekly distribution so that you have it all in one place. And what would be a sort of multi-step process to set that up in the UI has now happened with a simple action as part of this conversation. But again, with the discovery and search and a similar scenario, I can continue the conversation. So if I want to change that, if I need this report actually every Monday morning for my sales meeting at 9 a.m., and it would be more useful to get it in Slack, rather than having to go through and set up a new distribution now, I can just continue the conversation and set up that what we call a burst for a distribution easily within the UI here. Similarly, if I wanted to share this with, say, Marius, what do you want to say? Who do you want to share it with? We can continue that in the conversation on the left-hand side. I can at the person, I can put in a description. And again, it can set up that notification to that person very easily in what is a simple conversation on the left. And more complex things, as we said before, like the concept of an alert. Again, in our product today, that's a multi-step wizard to be able to do that. Well, if I want to set up an alert, the concierge asks me what the criteria is for that. Well, I just want to know if sales looks weird in my region at any point in time, let me know. Again, because it has the context and the metadata around this particular report that I'm referring to, it knows this data is coming in on a daily basis. It can make an educated recommendation around, okay, let's look at the 30-day moving average. Let's look if it changes more than 20% from that. Again, I know this is daily, so I'll send you an email every day at 9 a.m. if that condition is met. Again, I can continue the conversation if I want to tweak that particular rule. Well, actually, let's make it 30%, and this would be really useful on my mobile device. So the concept of not just discovering content, but getting people to a targeted set of content quickly that's going to help them answer their question, and then carry out actions related to that. Again, nothing that they can't do within the product today, but it's natural to continue the conversation to help carry those out. And I think it is important here to not kind of over-engineer this as well. Some things are easier to do in the AI, in the UI, right? If I want to favorite a particular report, it's quicker to click on a star than it is to have a conversation around doing that. But these multi-step processes that require some knowledge, it probably does make sense to carry them out as part of the conversation. finally, a quick perspective from sort of more of the business analyst, where we can sort of look deeper into the metadata behind this content. So, again, maybe I'm new to the marketing team. I want to know what marketing reports are out there. Looking into usage, we track usage and engagement with content within the portal. So what are the most popular reports that people are looking at in the area that I'm responsible for? Maybe I'm responsible for looking at analysis around customer acquisition. I see there's a report around that. Well, what's sourcing that report? Where do we get that data? What data source is it coming from? What tables in the data warehouse are sourcing it, so that I've got the context around, what the data is feeding this. And then what other reports are built off of those tables. So really tapping into some basic lineage around this catalog of content that I'm ultimately going to be working with and adding to. And again, it gives me the context that I'd have to go and drill into today on my own, probably with different tools and technologies, or have conversations with other analysts in the area that I'm working on. So that gives you some sort of perspective around a very particular sort of use case with this concierge-like experience, and just sort of logically, again, how this is working and how sort of the LLM fits into the architecture of what we're doing and how we're leveraging it. So, obviously, we're making this available, as I said, through the portal itself, which is what you were seeing in those screenshots. We want to put this as well where people are working, so it makes sense to integrate it into our existing Slack and Teams chatbots, so people can have the conversations there, and make it available through our API as well. And this might be a discussion that we continue in future webinars, but how sort of bots across the organization in different areas come together for users when you might be creating creating chatbots in for your help desk or your support organization, and bringing those together around things like the BI Concierge, so it's a seamless experience for users. Having a REST API into the Concierge allows you to do some of that stuff. But the Concierge is essentially integrating, in this case, with GPT-4. But the intention is that we can integrate with any real LLM out there that can help solve these issues. And having the knowledge and the integration then with the security model, so that we can understand what we should be recommending to each user based on permissions and security, and that wealth of metadata that is coming from multitude of different sources allows us to make those recommendations. And so, the benefit, obviously, of the concierge is we're using it to, as Marius alluded to, bite off a problem that's kind of fairly well contained. We can have a fairly high level of confidence in the recommendations that it's making, and also sort of minimize the consequences of sort of incorrect recommendations as well, right? So if it's not sort of the perfect report, we're not sort of putting a high consequential answer out there as if we were looking into the data, as Marius said, and making a recommendation that doesn't have the full context around what's happening in the data. And ultimately, we're trying to improve that sort of analyst productivity, take some of those mundane conversations off the table so that users can self-service around that content. So with that, we've got a few minutes here to answer any questions that might be coming in. So I'm just going to switch across to the Q&A window here and look at what we've got. But if people have questions, feel free to enter them in there or the chat, and we'll get to those. So let's take a look at these, Marius, quickly. Maybe let's take the first one. So what are the top 3 benefits as per clients of using the concierge as compared to sort of directly working with ChatGPT in the browser? So I think this sort of comes down to the integration and the context and that side of it. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, your benefit there is if you're using ChatGPT in the browser, you can ask ChatGPT about the things that it has, inside of the models through 2021, and if it's hooked up to a browser interface, then you can ask about, and it can browse the web for you, or you can access a particular tool. But what you cannot do is ask it about your specific reporting and metadata that we've captured about that reporting, and have it respond to that in a way that enforces security and gives you the right information. So all those use cases that Mike highlighted, where you're saying, I'm trying to find the right resource, I'm new to a team, or I'm new to the organization, or hey, I just want to understand what's been created recently, and I want to find the right resource, or even things that just go beyond just a particular report. I might be trying to figure out, well, what's the process that I go by to get a license for Tableau, or to request access to a report, or anything like that, right? Being able to get all those type of FAQs answered in a way that is specific to your organization. That's not just something that's available in the public domain.
I think that's the challenge we solve, right? Is you can't pass all that metadata and context as part of every question into ChatGPT, right? So it needs to be managed as part of the platform, and that's kind of what we're doing behind the scenes with integration into our metadata and search engine API and that sort of stuff. So providing the context is needed, but you can't just throw that into the browser. Do you want?
So is this similar to using LangChain? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
LangChain to feed my data set and get the results from my specific data. So what just for those of you who don't know what the questioner is asking, LangChain is a library that you can use, Python library that you can use to basically create chains and agents, event chains, and also independent agents that use that interface with large language models. And so that the solution that's being referenced here is something to be able, where you could basically imagine you ask a question and then you go off to some database, it's the kind of I think it's called RAG, the model where you're going to retrieve information, and then you enhance the context window with that information. You pass it to the model, then you ask and get the answer. And so if you're going to do that off of a data set to get results for specific data, again, we don't recommend that as a general paradigm or approach, because it does not scale to the large data volumes that people have in the real world today, right? So if every question can be boiled down to a small data set that you can pass to the LLM and provide and have it analyze and provide your result, then that's great. But in reality, in the real world, if you're in any kind of enterprise that has any volume of data, that's simply not the case. And so for that reason, that particular design pattern, get my data set, pump it into for data in particular, put it into LangChain and get results is not the right approach.
Question here about, I think, about sort of what's available and what's in production around the concierge today. So maybe let's talk a little bit about sort of the timeline with development of what we're doing. So concierge is kind of in development right now. We are going to start betaing that towards the end of
we're doing this year.
Well, betaing towards the end of this, so the next Q3 we're in it now, with some specific customers, but ultimately have a version more generally available towards the end of the year.
That's right.
That will include the action stuff that's being asked in this question.
Yep.
How about data privacy if you're using third-party APIs like OpenAI in the back end?
Yeah, and that's a great point, and it's a great question, and it's something that everyone's really concerned about, data privacy. And so and that's another sort of key consideration when you think about using an LLM to answer a specific data question. And this is the reason why we are tracking our solution, where you're not passing structuring our solution rather, so you're not passing data to the LLM at all, right? So if you look at if you remember the architecture that Mike showed you, what's happening is that the LLM is receiving metadata, right? It's receiving things like which reports are getting the most usage, the name and description report, not the sensitive information about what's inside of the report itself. Even in the case where you're building an alert, the LLM is not receiving the data. The LLM just creates, interfacing with our API, it creates the alert rule within the system, but all of the processing of the data happens, within the application that's sitting either in the cloud or behind the VPN or wherever it is that you have it in a secure format, and no actual data is being passed to the LLM.
So there's a question whether the concierge can generate dashboards. No, we're not going down that route at the moment. I think, if you look at a lot of the BI vendors that are out there, I think they are looking at that sort of use case. And I think ultimately these things maybe come together, right, in the future. But right now, for us, it's about the concierge is about suggesting content that exists today. Other questions coming in here. So use cases, what use cases may look like that sort of use natural, I think that's sort of an extension of what we were just talking about. So natural language queries and the BI concierge. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, Marius, but I think, conceivably there's scenarios where you're searching for content and there isn't any today, right? Yep. And then if some of the BI tools or, conceivably we may go there, taking those questions and potentially generating new visualizations, I think, yes, there's potentially some future capabilities there. It's not something we're biting off initially, but you can conceivably see if we can get people to the right data set, even if there's not a visualization there, that we could generate visualizations.
And to add to what Mike said, we already do have an integration with a tool like ThoughtSpot, where you can kind of go from searching for content to going to data into ThoughtSpot to search for data, or take pins or answers and post them into the portal, so that already exists. And then I think there's definitely opportunities to integrate that kind of capability into a bot as well in the future.
So yes, Olivia, in clarification, I think there are, again, not in this first iteration, but I think there are opportunities where at some point, yes, it may go into the data, but again, I think we have to think about things like security and permissions and all that when we get to that point. I think that's our question list. So thanks everyone for joining today. We will be sending out the recording afterwards, and look out for future webinars that we're going to be advertising soon. Thanks for your time, Marius.
Thank you for attending.